There is a moment in your evolution when something inside you shifts with a clarity that feels almost unsettling. It does not explode through your life with noise or confrontation. It arrives in the quiet. A quiet so honest that it exposes every place where you once handed out access to yourself without thinking, without questioning, without recognizing the sacredness of your own becoming. This moment feels like stepping into a new skin that somehow always belonged to you, but that you never truly inhabited until now. You begin noticing the shift in subtle ways. You no longer feel the urge to explain your growth to people who only understood the version of you that lived in confusion. You no longer feel comfortable giving emotional access to those who interpret your silence as distance rather than development. You start realizing that becoming yourself is not a performance. It is a private process, a return to an inner world that does not owe anyone an invitation. What makes this discovery so powerful is the awareness that your transformation does not need witnesses to be real. You do not need approval to evolve. You do not need validation to shed layers that no longer belong to your truth. You are allowed to grow in spaces where no one is watching. You are allowed to protect the fragments of yourself that are still forming. And for the first time, you recognize the difference between isolation and sacred privacy. One drains you, the other protects your rising self. This realization feels like a soft awakening. You start to see how often you shared pieces of your inner world with people who did not know how to hold them. How often you tried to justify choices that were meant to be honored, not debated. How often you distorted your path to make others feel comfortable with a version of you that no longer exists. You begin to understand that the guilt you carried was not yours. It was the weight of expectations placed on a self you have outgrown. In this new clarity, something becomes undeniably true. You do not owe anyone access to the person you are becoming, not because they are undeserving, but because growth demands protection, because evolution requires silence, because becoming yourself is a sacred process, and sacred things require boundaries. You are not shutting people out. You are allowing yourself to grow without interruption. You are guarding the parts of your identity that are still fragile, still shifting, still learning how to stand. This is the realization that changes everything. You begin to see that you are not being distant. You are being intentional. You are not being cold. You are being conscious. You are not withdrawing. You are returning. And in this return, you reclaim the right to evolve without explanation, without guilt, and without offering access to those who misunderstand what this transformation means. There is a quiet pressure many people carry without ever naming it. The pressure to keep everyone involved in their growth. The pressure to explain every shift, every boundary, every moment of becoming. This pressure is not natural. It is inherited. It comes from a lifetime of conditioning that taught you to place other people's comfort above your own evolution. Before you even notice it, guilt begins shaping your choices long before growth ever has the chance to. From childhood, you are taught to be agreeable, to share your inner world, to justify your feelings, to maintain relationships even when they cost you peace. You learn to stay loyal to outdated identities because stepping into a new version of yourself feels like a betrayal of the people who knew the old one. You learn to feel responsible for the expectations others place on you, even when those expectations suffocate the person you are becoming. This is where guilt begins, not in your awakening, but in the beliefs woven into you long before you had the awareness to question them. You were taught that boundaries are unkind, that withdrawing to protect your inner world means you are pushing people away, that refusing to explain every decision makes you selfish. You start believing that you owe people access simply because they have always had it, regardless of whether it was earned or respected. This myth of obligation is powerful because it disguises itself as love. It disguises itself as loyalty. It disguises itself as responsibility. But in reality, it is a subtle form of self-abandonment. It convinces you that your growth must be shared to be valid. It convinces you that your inner evolution must be public to be justified. It convinces you that disappointing others is more dangerous than disappointing yourself. The tension grows stronger the moment you begin changing, the moment you stop playing the roles that kept everyone else comfortable, the moment you question the emotional contracts you never consciously agreed to. As you evolve, You feel the pull between who you were taught to be and who you know you are becoming. And that pull often feels like guilt, even when you are doing the most honest thing you have ever done. But here is the truth that this myth never wants you to discover. You do not owe continuity to the versions of you that were created for survival rather than authenticity. You do not owe reassurance to people who benefited from your silence. You do not owe explanations to those who interpret your boundaries as rejection. Your growth does not require permission, and your becoming does not require an audience. The guilt you feel is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a sign that you are finally doing something new. You are breaking patterns that were never meant to define your entire life. You are stepping out of identities that were built for acceptance rather than truth. You are learning that the path of becoming demands loyalty to your inner self, not loyalty to outdated expectations. This is where the myth begins to unravel. Once you see the origin of the guilt, you realize it was never yours to carry. You were taught to feel accountable for everyone else's comfort, but your awakening requires a shift. You are not responsible for how others interpret your evolution. You are responsible for honoring it. There comes a point in your growth when you begin to understand that evolution is not a spectacle. It is not something to be announced, defended, or put on display for the comfort of others. Your becoming is a sacred process, one that unfolds quietly beneath the surface of your outer life, much like a seed breaking open underground, long before it ever touches the light. And just like that seed, the earliest stages of your transformation demand protection, solitude, and silence. Your inner world is not a space for public commentary. It is not meant to be accessed by every person who once knew an older version of you. Some parts of your journey are too delicate to be exposed before they are strong enough to survive the weight of another person's opinions. Growth begins where no one else can see it, in the place where you face yourself without interference. This is where real transformation takes root. One of the greatest misunderstandings people have is believing that authenticity requires openness at all times. They confuse transparency with truth. They assume that for your evolution to be genuine, you must share every step of it. But true authenticity begins internally. It begins in the decisions you make when no one is watching. It begins in the parts of you that are still forming, still vulnerable, still learning how to stand. Protecting these parts is not secrecy. It is wisdom. Some stages of growth collapse under premature exposure. The moment you share too soon, you invite projections, doubts, and expectations that do not belong to your becoming. People may question your choices before you have fully embodied them. They may resist your transformation because it disrupts the version of you they depended on. They may unintentionally pull you back into old patterns simply because those patterns are familiar to them. This is why privacy is essential. Not to hide who you are, but to protect who you are becoming. As you evolve, you begin to feel this instinctively. You pull back from certain conversations. You keep your inner work close to your chest. You avoid explaining your shifts because you know that not everyone is capable of witnessing your metamorphosis without misunderstanding it. You stop offering emotional access to people who have not earned the right to hold your truth with care. This is not withdrawal, it is discernment. There is a quiet power in honoring the sacredness of your becoming. You give yourself the space to grow without the noise of comparison. You allow your identity to strengthen before it is challenged. You learn to trust your own voice before inviting others into the conversation. You discover that the deepest breakthroughs happen when you are willing to evolve privately, without performing for the approval or acceptance of others. And something beautiful begins to happen. The more you protect your inner world, the more aligned your outer world becomes. You start attracting people who respect your boundaries. You start finding spaces that honor your truth. You start realizing that the right connections will never demand access to parts of you that are still healing. They will meet you where your growth is ready, not where they feel entitled to be. Your inner world is sacred. It does not need an audience. It does not need defending. It needs room to breathe, room to transform, and room to rise without interruption. Type 1 to write the next topic, or type the changes you want. There is a subtle illusion that follows you through life, an illusion so deeply woven into relationships that most people never question it. It is the belief that because someone has known you for a long time, They are automatically entitled to every new part of you. Familiarity becomes mistaken for permission. History becomes mistaken for access, and without realizing it, people begin treating your inner world as a space they should be invited into, simply because they have always occupied it. This is the access fallacy, the assumption that proximity in the past guarantees proximity in the future. The belief that because someone once understood you, they should forever understand you. But growth dismantles this illusion. You begin to see that knowing the old you does not grant anyone the right to enter the new one. The version of you they remember no longer exists, and the version you are becoming is not obligated to replicate itself for their comfort. Familiarity can become a subtle form of entitlement. People may expect explanations for your choices because you once explained everything to them. They may assume you will share your inner landscape because you once offered it freely. They may interpret your boundaries as distance because they were accustomed to accessing you without limits. Their expectations say more about their dependency than your evolution. Some individuals will disguise this entitlement as concern. They will ask why you changed, why you pulled back, why you no longer share as openly as before. They will frame their curiosity as care, but underneath it lies discomfort. Discomfort because your growth challenges the emotional contracts that kept them comfortable. Discomfort because they can no longer rely on the predictable version of you they once controlled. Discomfort because your evolution disrupts the role they assigned you without your consent. When you begin recognizing this fallacy, something inside you shifts. You no longer feel obligated to offer explanations. You no longer bend your truth to preserve someone else's familiarity. You no longer take responsibility for the unease others feel when they cannot access parts of you that are not meant for them. You begin to understand that your life is not a revolving door for anyone who demands entry. This awareness softens the guilt you once carried. You start seeing that you were not pulling away. You were outgrowing dynamics built on entitlement rather than reciprocity. The people who respect your boundaries do not demand access. They adjust. They meet you where you are. They grow with you instead of resisting your transformation. The people who do not respect your boundaries will try to guilt you into giving more than your becoming can afford. Your growth is not a shared asset. Your evolution is not communal property. You are allowed to rise without giving constant updates, without offering emotional availability on demand, without reopening doors that your soul has already closed. Familiarity does not mean entitlement. History does not mean ownership, and someone's previous access to you does not guarantee their presence in your future. This truth may challenge the relationships built on old versions of you, but it protects the person you are becoming. It allows you to evolve without the weight of false obligations. It reminds you that your becoming is your own, and anyone who feels entitled to it has forgotten that access to your inner world is a privilege, not a guarantee. There comes a stage in your evolution when you begin to see how deeply your old identity was intertwined with the roles others assigned you. Roles you never chose. Roles you accepted because they kept the peace. Roles that formed silently through patterns repeated over years. When you start growing, when you begin stepping into a more aligned version of yourself, these roles begin to crack. And the moment they crack, the people who relied on them feel the disruption more strongly than you do. Growth dismantles the version of you that made everyone else comfortable. If you were the one who always said yes, your boundaries now feel like rebellion. If you were the one who kept the emotional balance, your silence feels like abandonment. If you were the one who absorbed attention, your refusal to carry it feels like conflict. Transformation does not just change you, it changes the entire dynamic around you. And not everyone is prepared to adjust to the shift. Some people relied on your predictability. They counted on your old patterns because it kept their own patterns unchallenged. When you stop overgiving, they lose the emotional convenience you provided. When you become more self-aware, they can no longer redirect their responsibility onto you. When you practice authenticity, you expose the places where they relied on your self-abandonment. It is not anger they feel, it is displacement. They no longer recognize their place in your life because that place was built on a version of you that no longer exists. Your growth breaks the unspoken agreements that shape the relationship. Agreements where you would minimize yourself to avoid conflict. Agreements where you would tolerate behavior that hurt you. agreements where your silence ensured their comfort. You never consciously signed these contracts, but you lived inside them. When you evolve, you step outside of them. And the moment you step outside, the dynamic collapses. This collapse often triggers confusion. People begin asking what changed. They question your motives. They misinterpret your growth as distance, coldness, or pride. What they are actually reacting to is the loss of the role you once played. And because they depended on that role, they may try to pull you back into it. They may test your boundaries. They may challenge your clarity. They may attempt to guilt you into shrinking again. Not because they do not care, but because your evolution disrupts the equilibrium they were comfortable with. Understanding this helps you see the situation for what it truly is. You are not becoming difficult. You are becoming honest. You are not rejecting people. You are rejecting the roles that kept you from yourself. You are not changing the relationship out of resentment. You are changing it out of integrity. The roles you outgrow were never meant to follow you into your future. They were meant to teach you where you were abandoning yourself. When your growth breaks these old roles, you begin creating space for relationships built on reciprocity, respect, and authenticity. You stop performing identities to maintain connection. You stop sacrificing peace to protect someone else's comfort. You stop negotiating your worth to preserve familiarity. This disruption is not destruction, it is liberation. It is the moment you reclaim your identity from every expectation that once defined it. There comes a point in your inner awakening when you begin to withdraw, not out of resentment, but out of necessity. The world often misinterprets this shift. People who once had unrestricted access to your emotions might take your distance as a personal insult. They may assume you are shutting them out or punishing them. Yet the truth is far more nuanced and far more grounded in self-respect. Distance becomes the space required for your becoming. It is not rejection. It is preservation. As you grow, your intuition sharpens. You begin to sense where you are giving too much of yourself away. You notice how certain dynamics drain your energy more than they nourish your spirit. You become aware of how some environments require you to shrink in order to remain accepted. And without consciously planning it, you start pulling back from anything that interferes with your evolution. The withdrawal does not come from a place of anger. It comes from a place of clarity. This distance is often misunderstood because people assume access is their right. They assume that if they have always been part of your world, they should automatically remain part of it. But as your inner landscape transforms, your external environment must adjust to accommodate your growth. You begin protecting your peace the same way a gardener protects a delicate seedling, not because it is fragile forever, but because it is fragile now. Some stages of becoming require silence. Some stages require solitude. Some stages require you to step back from voices that distort your intuition. Protective withdrawal is the moment when you stop overexposing your inner world to people who do not know how to hold it with care. It is when you stop sharing your wounds with those who do not know how to listen. It is when you stop confiding in those who transform your vulnerability into discomfort or judgment. Distance becomes the filter that reveals who respects your boundaries and who only respected your accessibility. You begin realizing that closeness is not defined by frequency of communication, but by the quality of connection. Some people lose access not because you stopped caring, but because your evolution demands a different level of presence than they can offer. You create distance because your growth requires it. The space you carve out is not a wall, it is a doorway. A doorway that allows you to breathe, to recalibrate, to return to yourself without noise, pressure, or emotional interference. As you step into this stage, you learn something essential about awakening. The parts of you that are still forming must be protected, not explained. Your intuition needs room to speak without contradiction. Your emotions need space to shift without being questioned. Your identity needs time to take shape without being compared to who you once were. Distance is how you honor this process. Distance is how you safeguard your becoming from influences that cannot support it. Those who truly care for you will not interpret your withdrawal as abandonment. They will recognize it as transformation. They will give you the room you need. They will meet you where your growth is leading you. They will not demand access. They will understand that the space you create is an act of internal alignment, not a sign of diminishing connection. Protective withdrawal is not an escape. It is a form of self-preservation that ensures your next chapter is built on truth rather than obligation. It is the sacred pause that allows your becoming to unfold without interruption. There is a threshold you cross in your spiritual and emotional evolution when the path ahead becomes narrower, not in limitation, but in precision. You begin to understand that not every person who walked with you in your past is meant to accompany you into your future. Growth demands alignment, and alignment reshapes the landscape of your relationships. The more authentic you become, the more you realize that some connections were never built to withstand the truth of who you are becoming. Authenticity removes the layers you once used to fit in. The moment you stop performing, pretending, or minimizing yourself, the dynamics around you shift. Some people are capable of meeting this new version of you with openness. Others are not. The friendships that depended on your silence start to waver. The relationships that thrived on your insecurities begin to dissolve. The connections sustained by old identities cannot survive the expansion of your new one. When you step into authenticity, the emotional ecosystem of your life changes. This threshold reveals something profound. You were not losing people. You were losing patterns. Patterns of approval-seeking. Patterns of self-abandonment. Patterns of shrinking to protect fragile egos. When these patterns fall away, the people who were attached to them fall away too. It is not rejection. It is the natural conclusion of an internal transformation that demands external clarity. Some individuals will resist your authenticity because it challenges the comfort they found in your old role. They may try to remind you of who you once were. They may cling to outdated versions of you that no longer align with your identity. They may expect you to stay predictable, manageable, and familiar. But becoming yourself often disrupts the emotional contracts they relied on. The deeper you grow, the less willing you are to negotiate your truth. When you reach this threshold, something inside you shifts. You stop trying to fit your future into the shape of your past. You stop trying to carry relationships that cannot grow with you. You stop believing that loyalty means staying loyal to your old self. You begin honoring the reality that authenticity is a journey taken by few, and those who walk beside you must be willing to evolve beside you. This stage is not about superiority. It is about resonance. Authenticity requires an environment that nurtures it. Some will choose to rise with you. Some will stay rooted where they are. This is not something to fight or fix. It is something to accept. Your future self cannot flourish in a garden filled with roots that refuse to grow. You cannot carry people who demand the comfort of your old patterns while you are trying to break free from them. As you step deeper into your truth, you start recognizing who aligns with your becoming and who aligns with your history. The difference becomes unmistakable. The people meant to walk into your future offer support instead of resistance, curiosity instead of defensiveness, expansion instead of confinement. They welcome your evolution rather than fear it. This threshold marks a turning point. It teaches you that authenticity is not just about discovering who you are. It is about choosing who gets to walk beside the person you are becoming. And the more honest you are with yourself, the clearer you see that not everyone is meant to make that journey with you. There comes a moment in your awakening when you realize that the most powerful parts of your transformation will happen away from the eyes of others. Not because you are hiding, but because becoming whole requires an intimacy with yourself that no one else can enter. Wholeness is not a performance. It is not measured by how many people validate your progress. It is shaped in silence, where your inner world can rearrange itself without interruption, pressure, or comparison. You begin to understand that solitude is not a sign of loneliness. It is a sanctuary for clarity. It is the environment where truth rises without distortion. When you stop performing for acceptance, your identity becomes rooted in something far more stable than approval. You start hearing the voice beneath your fears, the voice beneath your conditioning, the voice beneath every identity you constructed to survive. This voice reveals the self you abandoned, the self you are finally returning to. This return cannot happen in front of everyone. Some parts of you are too new, too fragile, too sacred to expose prematurely. You are rebuilding your inner architecture, and architecture requires time, patience, and protection. When you evolve privately, you remove the influence of opinions that would attempt to shape your growth before it is ready. You remove the temptation to shrink in the presence of those who still expect the older version of you. You remove the noise that would drown out the guidance rising from your own consciousness. There is a quiet liberation in this process. You no longer seek reassurance for every change you feel. You no longer rely on external reflections to confirm your inner truth. You no longer explain your transformation to people who were never meant to understand it. You begin to trust your own perception more than the interpretations of others. You learn that becoming whole is not something that needs approval. It needs permission from only one source, yourself. As you return to your inner core, you discover that the most meaningful shifts occur in moments no one witnesses. The nights when you choose peace over chaos. The mornings when you choose truth over comfort. The decisions you make when no one is watching but your own conscience. These internal choices build the foundation of your becoming. They are what make you whole, not the recognition or acknowledgement of others. This chapter of your awakening teaches you the importance of self-presence. You realize that you can sit with your emotions without outsourcing them. You can confront your wounds without seeking someone to fix them. You can walk through your fears without needing someone to hold your hand. The strength you thought would come from others begins rising from within you, quietly, steadily, undeniably. The return to self is a reclamation. It is the moment you stop giving away the authority of your identity. It is when you stop living through the eyes of others and begin living through the truth of your own consciousness. You understand that becoming whole is not a spectacle. It is a homecoming. And like all homecomings, it begins in private, in silence, in the deep places where only you can go. You do not need witnesses to become whole. You need courage to meet yourself fully. You need honesty to dismantle the illusions you once lived inside. And you need stillness to hear the wisdom that rises when you are no longer performing for approval. There comes a moment in your awakening when all the scattered pieces of your inner journey begin to settle into a single, undeniable truth. You realize that your life, your growth, your evolution are not debts to be paid. They are not obligations to fulfill. They are not performances to be shared with every person who feels entitled to your becoming. The deeper you go into yourself, the clearer it becomes that you owe no one access. What you owe is to yourself. You owe yourself the freedom to evolve without restraint, without guilt, and without seeking validation from those who cannot understand the path you are walking. The idea that you must grant people permission to witness every stage of your transformation is a lie taught by fear, not by truth. Fear convinces you that your worth is measured by how much access you offer. Fear tells you that holding boundaries will make you unlovable. Fear whispers that your evolution must be shared to be real. But awakening dismantles these illusions. Awakening teaches you that evolution is an internal contract, not a public negotiation. When you begin choosing yourself, some will interpret it as distance. When you create boundaries, some will misinterpret them as rejection. When you grow beyond old patterns, some will claim you have changed too much. None of these interpretations are your responsibility to manage. The reaction others have to your evolution reveals their relationship to your past self, not the truth of who you are becoming. Their discomfort is simply evidence that your soul is moving in a direction they were never meant to follow. You start to understand that giving someone access to your inner world is a sacred allowance, not an automatic right. Access must be earned with respect, presence, and reciprocity. It must be given to those who can honor your becoming rather than criticize it, to those who support your growth rather than shrink it, to those who can accompany you without trying to reshape you into the version of yourself that once served their needs. As you rise into this clarity, something shifts inside you. You stop fighting to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you. You stop explaining your boundaries to people who have no intention of respecting them. You stop seeking approval from people whose opinions were never aligned with your soul's direction. You begin choosing truth over peacekeeping. You begin choosing alignment over acceptance. You begin choosing depth over familiarity. This spiritual truth is liberating, but it also requires courage. Courage to let go of relationships that cannot grow with you. Courage to protect your evolution, even when others call it selfish. Courage to walk alone when the path narrows. But the reward is profound. When you stop giving away access out of obligation, you reclaim the most important relationship you will ever have, the one with yourself. You reclaim your voice, your intuition, your emotional space, and your spiritual autonomy. Your evolution is not an apology. It is not a negotiation. It is not a compromise. It is a return to the self you were always meant to be. And that return requires one essential commitment: to give yourself the freedom to evolve without asking for permission from anyone who does not walk in the direction of truth alongside you. Your becoming is sacred. Your boundaries are sacred. Your evolution is sacred. You owe no one access to any part of it. What you owe is to yourself, and that debt is paid with honesty, courage, and the willingness to walk the path that calls your soul forward. If this message reached you at the right moment, take a breath and recognize what that means. Life has a quiet way of delivering the truth exactly when your soul is ready to hear it. You are standing in a chapter where your evolution is asking for space, clarity, and protection. Honor that. Trust that. Allow yourself to grow without shrinking to fit the expectations of who you once were. If you feel called to share, leave in the comments one part of yourself you are reclaiming. Your voice may become the reflection someone else needs to validate their own journey. If you prefer silence, write it privately for yourself. Let it be a reminder that you are choosing the path of alignment rather than obligation. If this message resonated with your heart, remember this truth as you move through your day. You owe no one access to the person you are becoming. What you owe is the freedom to evolve without apology and the courage to protect the inner transformation unfolding within you. Type any changes you want or say done if your video script is complete.